call back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here speaking with Michael Cremo. His new book is The Forbidden Archaeologist, and actually it just came out. Michael, you were talking about the ape-men people living parallel to humans in the past, and so I know in your books you talk about fossil evidence of stone tools, of modern human footprints in stone, which I've actually personally seen one that was definitely a human footprint, which if it's in stone, it obviously has to be millions of years old for the dirt or mud or whatever to turn to stone. So do you think that these were modern humans that existed at an earlier period of time and then we just kind of annihilated ourselves like really, really, really back into the Stone Age? Or do you think these were like the extraterrestrials that were here 3 million years ago? Who do you think created these artifacts?
Well, in my books like Forbidden Archaeology and this most recent one, The Forbidden Archaeologist, I talk about archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. And by that I mean human bones, human footprints, and artifacts of the kind that could only be made by a human being that are found in layers of rock millions of years old. You know, in other words, they shouldn't be there according to the standard theories. According to the standard theories of human origins that are taught in schools and universities today, human beings like us first came into existence between 100 and 200,000 years ago. And before that, there shouldn't be any human beings like us present on Earth. But most of the ancient wisdom traditions, including the Vedic cosmology of India, tell us that humans like us have been present on Earth for millions and millions of years, going all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. So there is evidence for that. Scientists have found human footprints, human artifacts, human bones going back many millions of years. Of course, you won't see these things mentioned in the textbooks. That's why I call it forbidden archaeology, because there's a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. The evidence that goes along with the dominant theories will pass through this filter, and therefore you'll see it in the textbooks. But evidence that radically contradicts the accepted theories gets filtered out, and therefore you don't see it in the textbooks. But it is there, and I've kind of collected all that evidence and put it out in my books like Forbidden Archaeology and The Forbidden Archaeologist. So this evidence, I believe, is evidence showing that humans like us have always existed on Earth. Of course, there have been vast cycles of time that take place. There have been repeated catastrophes in the history of life on Earth. So, yes, there can be times when human civilizations are flourishing, and there can be times when human civilizations are at a very low level. But the main thing for me is that human beings at this level of culture or some other level of culture have always been present on Earth. And not just on Earth. According to the ancient Vedic cosmology, there are about 400,000 human species scattered throughout the whole cosmos. So we're not the only human-like creatures in the cosmos. And according to the ancient Sanskrit writings, if we look at the histories, there have been visitations. Human-like beings have come and visited the Earth. Now, these extraterrestrial beings, according to the Vedic cosmology, are not always flesh and blood humans like us. They are often higher levels of beings who would be called demigods, or maybe, to use Christian terminology, angels. In other words, higher, more subtle beings, or not simply extraterrestrials, but what we might call extra-dimensional beings. And yes, our human population on Earth has always been in contact with these extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional beings. So actually, some, according to the Vedic history, some human beings on Earth are hybrids. For example, there's a Sanskrit epic called the Mahabharata. It's a epic, sort of like the Indian version of Homer's The Odyssey or something like that. It's a
way
great
more
Sanskrit.
epic than that.
Yes.
It's 9 books
but
long for those that are listening. 9 books. Go ahead.
Just to put it in context. But in some of the main characters in this epic called the Mahabharata, like the 5 Pandava brothers, they have a terrestrial mother and celestial or extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional fathers, not of this earth. For example, Arjuna, his mother was a queen on earth, but his father was a demigod. And actually there are also accounts like that from different cultures. According to traditional Japanese culture, their royal family, their imperial family, is descended from a sun goddess. And there are accounts like that from many different cultures, the Greek and Roman culture. Some of the heroes of the Greeks and the Romans, they also were hybrid in this sense that they had either a celestial father and a terrestrial mother, or vice versa. So this is one thing that we find in the Vedic cosmology, is that we're not alone in the universe. We're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, and we interact with them.
I just find it so fascinating that there is such a level, and I'm going to say, of forgetfulness. I mean, even when you talk about early Greek and Roman or Egyptian, that, there's all of this information in the Vedic tradition, and then you look at these other cultures, and even though they talk about some pretty old stuff, it's kind of like they dropped the ball. They lost the cliff notes to something that's so much deeper. I don't know, maybe we've lost the cliff notes to what's much deeper.
I think one thing that I always found fascinating about the Vedic cosmology or the Hindu cosmology is that the culture survived. There's Vedic culture alive today in India. You can go to temples in India where they're worshiping and doing things just as they were thousands and thousands of years ago. Whereas if you go to Egypt, to the pyramids and things like that, you're not going to find pharaohs there anymore. You're not going to find Egyptian priests, performing rituals to the Egyptian gods. If you go to the Parthenon, in Athens, you're not going to find Greek worshippers of Athena and Apollo and those things there. And, the same in Rome. It's all gone, but somehow or other, the spiritual tradition in India has survived over these many thousands of years. The culture is still, to some extent, pervaded by it, and they're still doing the same kinds of things that are described in the ancient writings, which is one reason I was so fascinated by the Vedic cosmology and why I was drawn to it and began practicing a system of yoga and meditation, and have gotten a lot of inspiration for my work from the Vedic teachings, is that the culture that supported it in ancient times is still to some extent there today. Of course, that culture is having to struggle with all the influences of modernity and materialism, and the fact that India was ruled for some time by the European powers and things like that. But basically, a lot of the culture has survived intact, which is one reason why I was so fascinated by it.
Well, and it just seems like they have such a deep understanding of the subtle self, of the universe, of creation, of movement. They have such a deep understanding, and I guess this is, if the starting point is 5,000 years ago, we were living in caves, and walking around with our little clubs, and, we figured out that if you throw some seeds on the ground, they're going to grow, and then at the same time, like miraculously, at the same time, you have these deep spiritual traditions that kind of are right there. It doesn't make sense. I mean, that whole thing doesn't make sense.
And according to those, the Vedic histories, say you were mentioning, like according to the standard histories that are taught in school today, before about 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, everybody was a hunter-gatherer. There was no agriculture. There was no livestock. People were just scrounging around for whatever they could kill or dig out of the ground. And according to the standard accounts, the very first village life where people settled down, built houses, started cultivating crops, and domesticating animals was only about 12,000, 10,000 years ago. And then, according to the standard histories, the first urban civilizations began to arise about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago in the Nile Valley, the Euphrates Valley, the Indus Valley, the Yangtze River Valley in China. And that's the standard account that you get, which is, to me, totally inaccurate, because there's information in a lot of different wisdom sources, but in particular in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, that there have been developed civilizations on Earth for millions and millions and millions of years. It's not something that just happened, 5,000 years ago. Of course, just as today we see that there are different levels of culture on Earth, there are many people living in modern cities with computers and cell phones and jet airplanes and all that stuff. But even today, there are some isolated parts of the world where people are living in a more simple and natural way with very simple technology. Some simple pottery, some simple technology, stone tools, flint knives, and things like that. So even today, there are different levels of culture among the human populations on Earth. So I think similarly in the past, it was also true. Yes, there may have been some people who were in the past who were living in a very, very simple way, but there were also more developed people. The ancient Sanskrit writings of India tell us that millions of years ago there were huge cities. I'm not going to say modern, because I think our modern cities are pretty trashy. There were beautiful urban centers with vast parks and flowering trees and beautiful buildings made of marble and things like that. Just I mean, sometimes people try to create a little sense of this by building little amusement parks like Disney World or something. But there were vast cities like that where people once used to live, in addition to people living in a more simple natural life. And they had, according to these accounts, they had airships and spaceships. They were called vimanas in the Sanskrit language. They had robots that did different things, just like we're starting to have little robot rug cleaners and things like that. I've read some Sanskrit texts that tell of different sorts of robots that were used by ancient people. They used vimanas or spacecraft. They were able to tell time by measuring the movements of atoms and things like that. These things are all described in the Puranas, these ancient Sanskrit writings. So I think no, it's not true that 5,000 or 10,000 years ago everybody was just living in caves and existing by hunting or gathering, or just by the most simple and primitive, crude types of agriculture.
I'm going to totally change topic here, so I hope you're okay with that.
Sure.
One of the things that I have come upon recently is the concept that in most cultures around the world there's an association with snakes or serpents or monsters or some kind of creatures from the underworld or under the water, but there's always this under association. And in the Hindu cosmology, they talk about the nagas who live in the earth. And what's going on with these, and I'm going to call them snake people, because someplace I was reading they were talking about, well, there was snake worship, but I don't know, that just seemed too shallow for me. That there were snakes around, so we're going to worship the snake. Any insights on that?
According to the Vedic cosmology, we live in a multi-level universe. Basically, there are 14 different levels of the material universe. At the top levels are the planets of the demigods and sages, and these are very subtle realms of very subtle energies. And so they're inhabited by, as I said, the demigods, different categories of liberated sages and things like that. And then the middle levels, around the 7th level, that's where we exist now. And then below us, there are lower levels of the cosmos. You can call them subterranean levels. And they're inhabited by various types of beings. It's not necessarily that they're, within the earth in the way that, we might think of what we mean by subterranean. But what it means is a lower level of the cosmos. And in one of those lower levels is the home of a type of being called a naga. And they are described and depicted in the ancient Sanskrit writings and in temple art and things like that as having the form of serpents. But not exactly like that, because sometimes they're depicted half human, half serpent, or in the literature they're described in such a way that they can speak, they have a whole culture, they have a whole society, with rulers and citizens and towns and cities. So it's not as if they're the ordinary type of snake or serpent that you're going to find in crawling around on the ground somewhere. They're a mystical type of being with what we would call mystic powers, and that those powers sometimes included the ability to change forms. So there is a vast literature on the nagas in the Puranas and in other Vedic texts, but it would be wrong to identify them with, although they're described as being serpent-like in form or having the form of serpents, they're not, say, like an ordinary snake that we would just see on our level of reality.
Well, and it also sounds like they're living in another dimensional space, different vibrational frequency, and not like, if you go into that cave, you're going to meet these like snake people hanging out.
No, it's more like it's a different level of the cosmos. Like I said, not like if you dig a hole in the ground, you're going to find the world of the nagas. It's a little bit different, more like you would say, either a different dimensional space or a different level of the cosmos, something like that. Now, that doesn't mean that they cannot sometimes appear on our level of reality. This is a feature of the Vedic cosmology that some beings can travel through these different levels. Some beings are confined to the level that they exist on, like us. We human beings, we're confined to the level of reality that we exist on unless we take up some system of yoga or meditation by which we get the ability to elevate ourselves off this level of reality, which is what we should be trying to do, really. We should be taking up some process of consciousness elevation that will restore our conscious selves to the real level of reality where we belong. But aside from that, we're kind of confined to this level of reality, this level of sense perception. It's like a little virtual reality system. The Vedic universe is something like computer games that some people play. Like if you kill all the demons on one level, then you go up to the next level, and then you encounter other things. And then if you do everything right there, then you go to some other level. And unless you do, you're stuck on that level. So that's more or less what the Vedic universe is like. It's a universe of different levels or different dimensions stacked one on top of the other. And to get from one level to the next, you have to transform your consciousness or your vibrational frequency, if you want to put it in those terms, or your energetic state.
But that makes sense where if we are, I'm going to look at my paper, what I said before, if we're more stupid and greedy and egotistical, our energy would get denser, and we would ultimately, quote unquote, excuse my French, go to hell, which is where the snake people are, in that denser level of vibration, or at least that's where they're purported.
Well, it's a very complex system. I was mentioning terms like lower and higher, but if you study the Puranas, you'll see that there's some Sanskrit terms, like the planets or levels of the demigods are called Swarga, and the level that we humans live on is called Bauma. Then one of the subterranean levels is called Bauma Swarga. It means the subterranean heavenly planets. So it's actually described that the nagas, they live on a level of reality which is, just in terms of geography, it's below the level of our reality, but it's very highly developed in terms of the material facilities. It's very heavenly in that sense. Just like you can go to Las Vegas and it's in the desert. It's like a terrible place, but when you see Las Vegas lit up at night with all the lights and the fountains going and everything, it can appear quite opulent. Even though it's just a terrible place in the middle of a burning desert. It's so this Balma Svarga is something like that, although it is on a level lower than the terrestrial level that we exist on. It's a fascinating place in terms of its facilities. It said that it's in that sense it's just like a heavenly planet.
It just makes me laugh. The Las Vegas connection. It's like, Sin City, where you're surely going to hell. No, I get it, Michael. We'll be back with Michael Cremo after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.